So today we are looking at the topic of how do you turn strategy into actions and outcomes. And this is about getting very real and practical when we come to strategic planning. And I've got a friend joining us today who I'll ask to introduce herself very soon, who does this for her day job. And a lot of you would do this as part of your work. And we know that the reality of forming strategy and then getting everyone aligned to actually make it all happen is can be quite complex. And so we want to really get quite practical and real and understand how could you just move this forward and start to improve this incrementally and get better results in what's happening in your business. And that's what we want to look at. So on that note, I'm going to ask Maria to say a few words of introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I've been in the strategy and change function for the last 15 years. Most of my roles relate to helping leadership teams clarify their vision, clarify where they want to take the business, and actually ensuring there's alignment between the team, the functions, and individuals across organizations. I moved to London 10 years ago now. I came for 6 months and somehow I'm still here. And throughout my career, I like to change things up. So I worked in a startup as an employee number one for a few years, and also across global and complex organizations such as ACCA and Kaplan.
And I'm Natal, and I head up PXO Culture, and a few of you have joined us in previous meetups, as well as joined when we very much started Agile HR meetups several years ago. Claire was there right at the start, so lovely to see you again. As many of you know, my background is HR and then helping HR teams and our profession begin to embrace an agile mindset and start to evolve how we work. And this is very much looking at how do we play a role in organizational agility? How do we start to build the people practices that enable that? And also, what does it mean for us to embrace that mindset and start to actually transform how we work and just deliver more value across the business and to our people? So today we're looking at essentially connecting that to the world of strategy and strategic planning. And so when Maria and I got together recently, we're like, well, the pandemic shows that a strategic plan is not going to hold very long at the moment. So from word go, you've got to be adaptive with how you approach this. And so do keep that in mind, that this is something that's not this kind of annual cycle and set in stone. It is something that is very organic, and we have to keep building it and adapting it. And so Maria is going to take you through the realities of that. A quick shout out for the book, Agile HR. If you go to PXO Culture, you can get a link for 20% off. And next meetup, so we're going to have a little bit of a Christmas break here at PXO Culture and some mulled wine. And then in the new year, we're getting going. So we're going to have some great friends from Kantar, which is a big market insights company. And they're going to talk about their Agile HR adventures. And they've been doing it for several years now. And so it'll be really interesting to hear their story about how it's developed and grown over time. And then we each year aim to do a massive morning meetup. So we're going to do one in January as a bit of a big bang to the new year. And this does have a small fee, but you get a lot out of it. So, and we're actually going to run an Agile HR learning sprint. So we're actually going to take you through some steps where you get your business challenge and you look at how to work more evidence-based and actually take it through to some experiments. So I'll get more details out about that very soon. And then at PXO Culture, we do learning in core skills around agile ways of working, as well as masterclasses. And if you want to know more, come and check us out or get in touch. Okay, so we're going to kickstart our discussion with a good old Zoom poll, which is also just to help Maria understand the different types of people we have on the call today, and so she can understand where we might need to spend more time and what particular topics we should look at. So I'm going to launch the poll, the first 2 questions now. All right, so on the call today, we have more people working in larger organizations than smaller. And then some people that weren't able to see the polls said, sort of 80 employees, and another one 100 plus. So we've, again, larger. And then what function are you in? HR has taken it for the day. So nearly half of us are HR L&D or OD. And then we have a bit of a mix. So you've got some finance, you've got some strategy, ops, marketing. So that's quite nice. So what we wanted to get an idea about is some of the themes that you might be looking at when you think of strategic planning and when you approach that in your organization. So we're going to do a 1-minute brainstorm, and then we'd like you to put your answer in chat. So I'm going to give you 1 minute, and I'd like you to consider what is your key challenge with strategic planning. So when you're going to do this action in your organization, what is your key challenge at the moment? So I'm going to time 1 minute, and then after that, I'll say, please let us know. And if you can pop that into chat, and then Maria will be able to kind of explore that during the talk. So your 1 minute starts now. Okay, so 1 minute is up. If you can pop in chat your key challenge, and we've got some interesting ones already. We've got getting people to be a bit more radical and move on from the same old thinking. So how do we actually move them beyond that kind of preset? Executive buy-in and alignment. So definitely we know we need to cover that. Annual budget processes for clients. Definitely, this is, and there's a dilemma now of how you align the annual budget with ongoing planning. How detailed versus high level should we be making it to be actionable? We've got aligning HR to business strategy. Yes, very much so. Alignment with organizational priorities. Priority planning, getting leadership to align. Keep the plan alive once it's developed. So I know that we've also touched a bit on that. Everyone's busy and to talk about change. So everyone's so busy. How do we actually do it? Deploying into OKRs. So we won't necessarily look at OKRs today. We're going to link into that topic, but that's a really good point around it. Collaboration across the organization. Getting people to think further ahead than 1 month. Culture, yes. Project capability, mindset. Transitioning from individual objectives to OKRs. Yeah, definitely. Not make it an event, but a live plan. That's a really interesting one. And we've got moving away from traditional review and reward schemes to fit with the change. So we can come back to that one on my side. Okay, so I know we're definitely covering some of that, Maria, and then we've got a few others that we can comment on as we go. Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. All right, we're going to move forward, and I'm going to hand over to Maria to talk about different stages, and throughout that, I'm going to ask her key questions, and if you start submitting yours, we'll also start to bring those in.
That's all. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for putting this in. We'll speak or touch upon a few of them. But how to make organization radical is a topic in itself. So we had to kind of drop that. But hopefully the process itself will give you, Rosie, some ideas of how you can start thinking about that. So the purpose of today's session is to consider how your strategic planning efforts deliver value to the organization and to individuals across the teams. What I want to show you is an approach that's hopefully pragmatic for you. And what we want to do is all of us want to have plans that are clear to everyone, holistic, meaning they're all encompassing all the teams and functions, and extremely important are aligned between all the teams and activities. And of course, another challenge is how to actually translate them into outcomes and actions across organizations. So very quick data. I would think it shouldn't surprise you, but it always surprises me every time I look at it. It's 8 years old, but I am 100% sure it did not improve that much since then. Only 65% of organizations have an agreed upon strategy. I hope the other 35 are more of a startups. I hope so. but we don't know this. Only 14% of employees understand the organization strategy, and less than 10% of all organizations successfully execute strategy. Well, I also work in change, and the last data I saw about successful projects being delivered on time and on budget from the original scope was around 1%. But hey, 10% doesn't sound that bad anymore compared to the project execution. But still, of course, extremely low. So before we get into OKRs and stuff like that, let's look at this tree and talk about how trees grow. Extremely, maybe not relevant topic, but let's bear with me. How does the tree grow? The tree starts with a seed, but of course it doesn't just grow automatically. They need a lot of love and care to turn into a young tree, at which point they're ready for the external environment and be growing outside. The tree grows from the twigs and the branches as they expand in the search of moisture and sunlight. So it's the ends of the trees that determine the direction of the tree, the way if it goes wider or taller. The other thing that's important to point out from a tree growing science is as the branches and trunk and twigs go, the trunk itself and the roots get fatter, so to provide enough foundation for the twigs to grow. And when I look at trees, and when I think of strategy, I always think of trees. Why? Well, the twigs for me are the actions of individuals and teams that relate to the branches, are connected to the branches, which in my head are strategic objectives. And then these strategic objectives, these branches prop up the trunk and help it grow thicker and more steadier, which is the organization's vision. And the tree is supported by the roots, which are values and behaviors of the people organization. You'll see that my tree doesn't have leaves. Well, the leaves, in my mind, they distract from the main point. They distract from the branches and the twigs and the wood that stays and doesn't change, except for growth, of course. And you will see also my tree looks like it's in Scotland. It's covered in fog, and of course that reflects a certain environment we're in. We thought we live in a certain environment in 2019. Wow, we had no idea. Anyways, so when I think of the outcome of the strategy, I would like to see the tree. Maybe not as complicated, but everything is connected all the way from the twig to the branch, to the trunk, and to the roots. Very quickly, the theory of strategic planning is, of course, everywhere as soon as you Google. It sounds very simple. You think of the environment, you do a SWOT analysis, you think of Porter's 5 forces, you think of your customer, absolutely. You see if you can get the teams think a bit differently and employ different kind of frameworks. And then at some point, you review the direction of organization, whether it's annual or quarterly analysis, and think of whether your vision still stands. Then you'll come up with a strategy, and then hopefully there's some kind of a plan after it. And of course, OKRs is a well-used framework, even though some companies use it without knowing that there's an official name for it. And OKR framework stands for objectives and key results. And it is a hierarchy of, well, I'm not allowed to use hierarchy in Agile. I'm sorry, Natal. It's a flow. It's a flow of objectives. So objectives go, if you can see the objectives, just like a tree, they feed into each other, and the key results support these objectives. The beauty of OKR is that it's transparent, which result feeds what objective, and it's aligned. So you can, it's aligned, and it's also quite easily measurable. So at the end of the period, the key results will tell you whether this objective was met or not. You do not need to spend hours and days on the leadership retreats trying to figure out whether the objectives were met. For me, strategic planning is about connecting activities, connecting actions of every person in the organization to the vision and working towards the same vision. How do we know that strategic planning exercise, whether it's continuous once a year, every 6 months, or whenever the crisis hits like last year, how do we know it's successful? I look at these three things. Everyone knows what we're trying to achieve. They don't have to know in every little detail. They don't need to memorize the word in the strategy document, but they know what's that vision, where we're trying to go. Everyone knows or knows how to find out who is doing what if they need to. And everyone knows how they personally and how their teams contribute to that vision of strategy. Strategic planning also needs to integrate two parts of the organization, sometimes separate, sometimes not, is the running the business as usual activities, or we call them BAU, and changing the business, which is transformation initiatives, change activities, and different projects that happen around the organization all the time. So I wanted to share with you a simple approach to strategic planning. We all know it all looks simple on paper. As soon as you Google, something like this will come up, and it looks very obvious and very doable, of course, until you start doing it. But let's talk through this. So I'll give an overview, and then we'll discuss in a bit of depth of each one of these areas. So it needs to start with objectives. The objectives are the foundation of the organizational activities, and I believe they need to be set top down, at least a draft of them. At some point, the template, just like the budget planning, the template for operational planning and people planning gets distributed to the team so that they can complete and demonstrate to the leadership team of how they plan to achieve these objectives and what do they need for their teams to achieve those. And then all these submissions through this template, which is consistent across teams, gets collated to, we call it a list or a plan. The leadership team gets that list back and engages in a prioritization and balancing exercise to hopefully come up with one plan, one long list of activities, initiatives, projects we want to do. And of course, the performance review, I'm pretty sure this year has to be at least quarterly, needs to happen to revise. The beauty of having one plan is that it's easy to change, and then you will see the changes and all the teams will see the changes. So let me move on to talking about each one of these. So we all know that the objectives need to be SMART. So let's super quickly go through them. And it's very difficult. What I want to say is very difficult to have specific objectives at the highest level. They don't have to be specific at the highest level, but think about I call them OKRAs. Think about the objective flow. At some point, they need to get specific. Even if the first objective that is supporting the vision is quite vague and inspirational, it's totally fine as long as it's broken down into specific objectives later on. And of course, it's for measurable. And here, I would encourage you to use whatever measures already exist in the organization. There's no need to invent the wheel. If the organization already uses key results, great. If the organization uses the word measures, great. If there's targets, great. If there's outcomes, great. It doesn't matter what they called as long as they measure the success of the objectives. And it's not really about how they're called. A is for actionable, but I like the other version that says assignable. Generally, with objectives, as most of us work in a matrix organizations, it's important to assign these objectives to the highest level of leadership to make them responsible for it. Whether it's owner or a lead that drives the objective across the teams and reports on that objectives, it's quite important. So assignable, I like to use it as well. R is for realistic, but I like to use it as relevant. Of course, they need to be relevant to the vision and relevant to other activities the organization is doing. And T, of course, stands for time bound. It's also quite tough, and this is where OKRs also succeed, because when you do OKR, you have to have the time bound, the time assigned to these objectives. And of course, organization that thinks an agile way will be much more trained to think about objectives as time bound, or it might be a challenge when there is no agile kind of processes embedded in an organization. So to get there, and it's not easy. Some of you might be lucky already have these objectives, or at least the process of setting these objectives. But to kind of see if you can improve in this area is, first of all, you need to ensure that there's a vision, right? If there's a vision as of 5 years old and nobody really understands what this means, there's no point to come up with objectives. But of course, you could come up with objectives and reconsider the vision, but the vision goes hand in hand, obviously, with strategic objectives. I would also improve what already exists. If there are some vague objectives, and let's see, they're not time bound, we'll just take small steps to see how we can make them smarter. It's essential to make sure that all functions and teams are represented at the leadership level to create or improve or enhance these objectives. Every function needs to provide the input. The conflict on the leadership level is, well, it exists whether we see it or not. And it's there for a reason. Diversity always brings the different points of view, the different incentives, and it's essential to push through that conflict, find a way to get through that conflict, because once you get through that, the objectives and the outcome will be so much better. And they don't have to be final at this point. As long as there's a draft, even if there's 8 of them and they're a bit vague, it's fine. Let everybody rest and let's progress further, because they will get clarified as the process goes on. Just take what you can get and continue on with the planning. Let's see which one of you actually have decent objectives set for your organization.
Okay, launching poll. Do you have organizational objectives set? So the answers are yes, no, not sure. So if you can't see the poll, you can pop it in. So do you have organizational objectives set? Yes, no, not sure. I'm going to share what we've got. So we have overall a yes, a few no's, and a few not sures as well, which always says a few things.
Interestingly, the 63% is exactly the percentage of companies that have organizational strategy.
There you go.
In 2012 as well.
And someone has commented that with coronavirus coming in, that's kind of means that everything's under review at the moment. So
of course,
you might have them, but they're getting revisited. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's perfectly fine. They do not need to be set in stone.
Mm-hmm. Also, I've got a question to ask at this stage is we had a lot of people talking about, aligning the executive, and you also had the great comment that you need diversity at that leadership level to really ensure that you're touching into everything that's going on in the organization. And I know that we've talked before about, this is not about just leaders coming together and, determining strategy themselves. It actually should reflect great conversations that they're having with the customer and with their people to truly understand what's going on the ground. And actually having that connection is so important. And whoever comes to that meeting should be representing that voice. So do you have any quick tips to share with people around how do you work with the senior stakeholders? How do you get that alignment? What's your experiences?
When you invite that leadership team together for whether it's a meeting, whether you're running it or ask them to run it, they should have consulted with their teams about what the objectives are. They should have thought of a customer and environment from their perspective. And quite often, very predictable, you will have marketing people and customer facing functions come in and say, well, let's talk about the customer. This is what our customers say. And finance function says, yes, but let's not forget about the budget. And this is our ROI objectives. And this is where the conversations happen. So my favorite approach is to workshop them and lock them in a room for, well, it doesn't happen for a day. It doesn't happen for an hour. It has to be, a few hours at least. It depends, of course, on the state of the planning process and maturity. But then kind of focus them on the customer and the vision and not conflict between them. So they all design that vision together and coming from the same objective. goes well because I usually say you're not leaving this meeting until you have some kind of draft objectives, and there is a motivation. The difficulty comes afterwards, is what do we do with these objectives? How do we manage those leaders to actually go talk to their teams, think about the objectives, and prepare for that engagement and the buy that needs to happen later. In the region, it's called Customer Empathy Map. If you Google it, you have different dozens of options for a template. And it's been, as the name suggests, it's been suggested as a kind of a marketing team tool. I used to use it with a marketing teams tool until I realized you can use it on internal stakeholders and even teams. When you have teams in conflict, it's extremely useful to think of the other team in these terms. So what you do is you kind of need to follow the process and start from the top, and you write into the template, what does your stakeholder team or any senior stakeholders think and feel? What really counts to them? Then what do they see in their environment, in the market, with the customers? What do they say and do in public to their teams? And what do they hear from their boss, from their other teams? And then you kind of summarize their pains and what's their obstacles in organization, and their gains. What is it? What's their measures of success? And what I like to do with this template is kind of try to summarize their need in a one sentence or word. Once we've done this, we've done, and it's a bit lonely to do it by yourself. You would want to do it with a few people you trust and who know those people or teams. But I've done it once on a CEO where I couldn't understand why he wouldn't take up conflict and make decisions. And the word we came up with was harmony. He liked everyone to get along. So he would only make decisions when backed into a corner by some of his direct reports. And once I knew that, I could sell my ideas and approach in a different way. To say, hey, if we solve this, then there will be more harmony and collaboration between. And he responded very well to this. So I absolutely love this tool, and you can use it on anyone. I even used it on a cartoon character once, which was fun as well. So that's something where you're struggling with. Thank you, Seema. This is something that to use if you're struggling to understand a person or a team and summarize for yourself how you can better empathize with them. It's not really about managing, it's about empathizing.
Yeah. And I just add that this is a technique that we use a lot in Agile HR space and, Agile develop, because it's about hearing the voice of the user or the customer and then bringing that into how you design a solution. And so strategy is the same. How do you bring in people's voice? So the strategy reflects that. So great.
Absolutely. Right. So at some point, when there is whatever time, whether you want to adjust this with a budget period, it's much easier to adjust it with a budgeting process, or whether you need to do it much faster. It's up to you. But there has to be a template, just like a budget template gets issued. It's the same process. So it's not a revolutionary concept. It's revolutionary because it's usually not applied to operating plans and people plans, but it's absolutely applied in budgets. So you would develop some kind of a template that has to be consistent across teams. It also needs to be easy to fill in and collate. This is not the time to come up with a mind map technology or a very cool, sophisticated system that can draw you those hierarchy flows trees. No, this is more of a basic like Excel that everybody can fill in and change anytime you want. So you do not spend time explaining to them how to fill this in, really. And at the very minimum, you would want to integrate operations, budget, and people in that template. So people think about these three things together as they plan. If you have a bit more buy-in and excitement, you can bring in technology in here. You can bring in skill set. By people, I mean either headcount or capabilities and skill set, whether you merge them, whether you separate them. It, of course, depends on your current processes. And then at the very minimum, the template would include pre-populated objectives. That was the whole point of setting up objectives first. And then against these objectives, people need to note what activities they plan to do. What are they dependent on in terms of teams or projects? what would be the outcome of those activities? How will we measure the success? The timeline is extremely important because then it will allow you to map out what the team is doing and find out that, let's say, in the month of January, the company cannot handle all of those things going live. So the timeline is essential. And whether you could bring budget together, some finance teams will be more open to it than others. And in terms of the process, you need to get all the stakeholders to agree on this template, including finance, strategy, marketing. These are the key teams that plan all the time, and they need to agree on these templates. And of course, once you start working on the template, there will be many more fields than what I've mentioned. These are just a bare minimum to start with. You also need to explain to people, of course, the whole process. What will happen? When will the template come out? What will happen? And what will happen with that template? What is actually going to happen? So you need to explain the whole strategic planning process, how it's going to work, and then distribute it with a structured deadline. Again, this is not something revolutionary. It's being done for the budget all the time, every 3 months. So tagging onto the budget is a great idea, but of course you need to explain how you go about this. And you also need to support people as they fill this in. Everybody will have a question, but also encourage the consultation between the teams. As they start, all of these initiatives and projects we're doing now, they affect more than one team. So as soon as they start filling in the templates, they will have questions for different teams, different projects, and let them talk to each other. They shouldn't fill this template in isolation. So I wanted to show you 2 examples of a template, and if you could put in the chat, which one do you think I prefer? This is an interactive PDF, and it has the current state with metrics. It has a plan, which has initiatives, assumptions, and a 1 sentence that summarizes that. And also it has the future state when you put it in your targets. And the second template has objective, a goal which supports the objective. You say what team department, what is the activity. You have a drop-down list of priority, outcome, measure. You assign the lead, going back to assignable smart objective. You have time, start, and end, so you can easily map this out. You highlight the dependencies and then this is up to you how you plan in your HR department, whether you usually would separate what is the headcount requirement and what is the people capability. So it could be either a people capability in terms of, let's say, freelance labor, or it could be what is the skills overall needed for organization. So it's up to you how far you want to take it and what exists. So if everybody can throw in a number, 1 or 2 in the chat, and then we'll see which template do you think I prefer based on what I've said so far.
We've got a few 2s coming through.
Wonderful. So everyone's listening. This is basically an exercise to check that you're listening. So at some point, you get these templates back. People usually would interpret this template a bit differently. So you'll need to review, explain, and then at some point, identify points to discuss, look at the dependencies. It's important for representative from most functions to read this collated plan, but of course it depends on the size of the plan. I worked in an organization where we had 300 people and we had 300 lines, and it was for the first time ever executive team had a list of all the activities. So I've had a workshop coming in. I had a workshop the day after the plan was collated. So I sent them the draft and I said, we'll go through this. And they were so excited. They read it overnight. And all of them came to the workshop more prepared than I thought. They were it wasn't perfect. It was a first draft, but they've never seen it all in one document before. So very excited. Another organization I worked at, we had 3,000 lines and nobody volunteered to read it. It was me and the representative from different business unit to read it and summarize and identify the points to discuss. So it depends, of course, on your size of organization and how it usually works. Or you can split it and different functions can read people side or technology side, operations side, budget, etc. And at some point, it needs to be prioritized. Usually, just like with budget, usually people ask for more than the finance is willing to give them. Just like the budget, the prioritization exercise needs to happen and balancing the times the budgets, the people, the skill set, all of these needs to be balanced and discussed. So you need to summarize. If you do summarize or to have a discussions, these are the things that need to be summarized, which is, of course, the required budget, dependencies on specific initiatives, the beauty of this list that will highlight to you what are the projects that power up lots of activities across organization. You will get a good view on a headcount and workforce. You will also identify, you might find projects that nobody knew about. I mean, I'm sure you will. The capabilities and skills that the teams require, and also technology, whether it's hardware or software, you can actually catch random things there as well that allow for alignment. Yeah, one massive backlog. Kind of, yeah. I'll stop here in the top.
I've got a question to ask you. So prioritization is very important, and it's what we talk a lot about also in agile ways of working and prioritizing through value. So I'm definitely going to ask more about in future around these the company that had 3,000 lines in their template. But what's your been experiences with prioritization? Any top tips? I know there's some there's lots of methods out there, but any what would be your tip for people to take away today?
My main tip is about people. I've tried once to the quantitative approach where I would assign a score to the priority and assign a score to the objective, and then you come up with a number and then say, hey, leadership team, here's how they score. I've never seen it work unless your organization already using this process and are very used to make decisions by numbers. It doesn't really work. So this is not the time to come up with a revolutionary prioritization process. Use what already exists in the budget, with the budget discussions. People are used to prioritizing. They're used to prioritizing in a different way, and they may not be used to discussing and expressing views of somebody else's team's activity, but there's definitely, the background there. So see what they're already doing and see how you could slightly improve it. So it's all about the people. It's about preparing, whether it's a customer empathy map or your stakeholder 2x2 based on influence and interest. Finance will absolutely be a power play in here, as is marketing, because marketing is usually stuck with the goals and the finance is stuck with reporting. So they're personally responsible for their aspects. So I think there's no perfect tip to prioritize, but I wouldn't go in a quantitative route unless it's already well established. And again, getting people in the room, summarizing these and discussing them one by one is what helps. Another thing that helps is going back to our trees. Another reason why you draw a tree is if you don't like the branch, you cut off the whole branch with the twigs. So it's much easier when everything is mapped as a tree to say, hey, actually, we can't do this objective. And if we can't do this objective this year, well, we might as well, push away all these activities that are connected to it. And this is why you have a template. So it's easier to move things around and you don't have to go through an exercise all over again and think about this. If you need to get rid of the branch, get rid of the branch. If you need to push away the twigs, then do that.
Yeah, no, I like that. And it resonates a bit with Rosie. She likes to use impact versus effort, which I've used a lot with teams. You can do good old Moscow, your must-haves, you should-haves, could-haves. I think with those ones, what you're trying to eliminate is the things that, look, it's just not needed right at this moment, and let's really focus on what is. And by focusing in on the most important, we start to, by nature, start to prioritize the list, don't we? I'm going to move you on to the next bit so we can get to some questions. Over to the next.
So let me just feed back to what you said. It's a stressful exercise. So it's not the time to come up. If your leadership team never seen a Moscow, then maybe don't bring this up unless they're asking for a method. So it's, kind of adjust and see whether there's an appetite to more frameworks or not. Right, and then we get to the plan, and the plan, of course, will have that long version, which we've just submitted and made better. And of course, you have a short version that will sit on your intranet and be communicated. Of course, short version must be clear. It's my firm opinion that it has to be no more than 1 page for each objective and not like 6-point font, right? So not too many words. And objectives needs to have accompanied high-level actions or goals, measures, and targets. I've recently seen organizations include values in the strategic plan, but I haven't seen organizations doing it in a sophisticated manner beyond copying and pasting the values on a separate page. So whether you can push it further and say, hey, so how does the values, our behaviors, people behaviors, and maybe skill set, if you get there, how does that support the strategy? There's absolutely an opportunity to talk more about the people side of it. And again, use or improve existing format, communicate via all channels, absolutely. And a lot of organizations get quite tired by this. And another controversial thing to put on is you need to link the way the leadership team proves to the rest of the organization that they mean this plan is to link it to the rewards, to the incentive structure, and to their performance. They absolutely need to do that. And then you also need to figure out how you're going to keep this long version plan alive and well. So it's easy, it's updated on a month, 2020 on a monthly basis, and things are discussed as they change. So the next steps I wanted to share with you, this is what you can do now. So you start thinking from the beginning of the process, but you can also try to consider the pain point. If you have a decent plan, but the organization is not getting engaged, then that's where you could try to focus on. But of course, the process, works consequently. You need to manage gardeners and lumberjacks, right? How do you make sure that tree is pruned and growing in the right direction? Also, I think it's quite easy in 2020 now to create sense of urgency. We all need to think about day 2, post-COVID era, what happens there. So creating sense of urgency used to be a bit of a pain in a kind of a stable environment, but everybody knows now there's a bit of urgency to plan and replan. And the 3 things I wanted to leave you with, which are the points of my conversation, is it's about people. You need to think more about people than we usually are, but with strategic planning. Alignment is more important than the right approach. For me, it's better to be aligned and go to the wrong direction because you'll fail much faster than be misaligned and hope that one of your 5 directions will work out. James Cameron did say hope is not strategy, and that absolutely, I take this as you need to not hope, but be aligned. And if you fail, fine, you'll fail much faster than you mess around for a year or 2 not knowing where exactly you're going. And any improvement at any stage of that process will have a positive effect because, of course, it affects every employee in the organization, and it will have a positive effect and scale that and enhance that effect throughout all the teams and objectives.
So the message is it's people before process. It's alignment. Together, we're in it. We know what we're doing. And even if that actually ends up being the wrong strategy, we do it quickly, we fail, we learn from it, and then we can pivot, which is the favorite word of this year, pivot direction. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because actually, the more alignment we have, the quicker we get to the point where we realize we might be on the wrong direction, and then we can change together, which is much better than mixed alignment, and then you fail anyway. So, and look at where you can improve. So what we wanted to kind of have the message today, which is, we've looked at this overall kind of process. We've tried to make it fairly as practical as possible, but you might be thinking, oh my God, I've got to now do this, reinvent the whole lot or make it all better. We're saying go to where the pain point is the most. So is it that you're actually kind of getting the right kind of discussions, but you're never really prioritizing and understanding what's in that one template? That might be a place to start. Or is it that actually we're not having the right kind of people discussions? Or is it at the team level? And I know a few of your sort of challenges at the start was how are we getting people to connect with their team level OKRs and really own the strategy at that team level. So go where the pain point is. You could even do a quick little, experience map of what's happening with your strategy process and look at where the pain points are. So we've got one question coming in, which is, I'm just going to shout out that I'm going to, what I might do actually is I'm just going to say goodbye in case you need to go. And then we will pick off a few questions. I have a few people that asked about OKRs and reward. I'm happy to, if you can stay on, I can talk a little bit about that from a sort of HR perspective. But what I'll just do is thank you, Maria, for your wonderful contribution and practical ideas today. So quick shout out, there's the book, and we've got the meetups in January. They're going to be up on the website, so please come along. And again, we're going to do some really practical learning sessions. And thank you so much for being here today. So we're going to go back to the questions. So we have one came in, which is, what tools or approach are you using for gather benefit realization?
So who was asking that?
That was Seema.
So are we talking about change management, project management, or we're talking about strategic planning overall? So running the business or changing the business, or together?
Around change management in particular, yeah.
So with benefits realization, it's a very tough topic. And from what I know is you need to adjust to the finance function a lot. So what I've done before is adjusting to the way finance function does. Of course, the most standard one is let's calculate ROI, right? Let's, if you have a business case and a project management, when it goes through the governance, let's evaluate, when we talk about change governance, let's evaluate the ROI, projected ROI at each point, and maybe not let projects through the gate. So the benefits realization starts from, I don't use a specific given framework. I'll see what organization has and try to improve it. But of course, it starts with a business case, and you give a quick, you start with a table that you think these are the benefits we think they realize. And at some point, at whichever gate that you think is appropriate, whether it's the first gate before the project is improved, or whether it's by the final gate before the project goes live, you need to get finance in to put a stamp on these benefits that they will be realized. And then by that point, you will have the business owner in charge of these benefits, right? But again, different organizations do different things. Sometimes the benefits go into the finance to own. Sometimes you get the business owner to own them. But in terms of the framework, it's very easy. You'll list what the benefit is. You try to tie it, of course, to strategic objective, and you try to quantify it. Yeah. And there's a list of measures you would propose. There will be some measures are quantitative, but of course, there will be also qualitative measures, brand value and stuff like this still need to be allowed to note as a measure. You just need to figure out how to measure them in a qualitative kind of way. So there is a framework that lists 4 types of benefits, which is financial quantitative. This is your ROI. Financial not quantitative. So that's say customer satisfaction. No, the other way. So that's maybe. Anyways, I'm not going to get into this, but so you have 2 by 2, and then you try to map these benefits and then try to get people to own them. And of course, finance also usually takes the lead on, clarifying whether these benefits are met. Am I answering your question?
You are. Right? I think the ROI is the key bit, and then finding a model that suits it. Yeah. That's fine.
You need to find a way to calculate ROI, and then have an additional measures to support the business case.
Yeah, and I like the fact it's qualitative as well as quantitative. So
yes,
thumbs up for that one, definitely. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. So I've got a couple of more people online. Should I talk a bit about OKRs and rewards? If people that are online, can you kind of let me know if that's the right one to talk about?
I would love to know the answer to that question.
Yes, please, from Adam. Okay. So it's very contextual because it kind of depends where you are in your kind of evolution of all of this. And in particular, whether you've come from something that's a bit more of what I call more kind of traditional waterfall style, which is and individually based targets and incentives, and whether you're now shifting away from that. So I think my message is, first of all, be really realistic about that context. And often too much of a shift to the new version is the culture's often is not necessarily ready for it, and maybe it's too much. One thing you can do, where I've seen it work in a kind of a bigger step, is that you can experiment and test it in one part of the business where they really want to do that. And then that it's great because that you've got a kind of prototype that you kind of can test things and work out what works and what doesn't, but also that can demonstrate the effect of it. So one company did that quite well. They went into the IT area first because the IT area was embracing more agile ways of working. There was more relevance there. They disconnected. One of the main things that you're looking at first is how do you, particularly on the individual level, disconnect reward and performance. So they're not directly feeding each other. So the feedback conversations aren't always about numbers. They're actually about, developing and growing. And then the performance conversations are much more about hitting team and collective targets, and they're adaptive. And so one organization went into that tech area. They did that disconnection. Reward then became something that was collective based on how the teams and the business were going. And then they created ways that the team could reward each other. So smaller base rewards that team members could give each other on their own. They didn't have to get approved every time. Also learning budgets that people own themselves rather than being centrally managed. So giving these ways of how the rewards are actually reflecting individual contributions, but they're actually dictated much more by the team themselves. And then overall reward is linked much more to overall performance. The company that did that, they tested that in the tech area for 6 months. And what they actually found is, it worked for them, but they actually even found a knock-on effect to the net promoter score. And that then made the rest of the company go, okay, we want to do it now too. So I think approaching it incrementally can be very beneficial. If you do everyone as an experiment in one go, everyone has to be really bought into it. And I find that that's not always the case depending on the values or culture you're moving away from. I have seen some companies do that, but and all I would say is if you approach it more in that, we want to test a way of doing this, find out if it works before we then implement elsewhere. You need to be very upfront that it is an experiment. So we're going to time box it. We're looking for particular measures. We're going to listen to your feedback of what works, what doesn't. So it's not just, we're piloting it and then we're going to do it anyway. It's literally, does this work or not? And if it fails, you don't do it. You kind of stop it there and then you look at different ways of evolving it.
That's great. I also find people kind of freeze as soon as there's any changes to incentive. There is either freeze or anger or passive aggressive behaviors. Has to be absolutely a trial kind of error. I agree, and attach it a bit to the teams that are used to work in an agile way.
Yeah, definitely. And like I've done it myself in an organization where we actually trial different ways of the feedback itself and linking that to discussions around OKRs. And then that led us to have data to demonstrate that the link to the quarter bonus meant that everyone was just always focused on the quarter bonus and not really focused on the feedback. So that gave us data to change that. And we then took that part out. That freed up the performance conversations. But this one, the reality was that at the time, the senior executives still wanted the end of year bonuses to happen and things like that. So it was incremental. You're not going to change it all at one go. And the way that senior executives see the concept of pay for performance can really influence this topic. And so you've often got to influence them over time. And where I've seen it done well is actually giving them research and evidence and data along the way to show that maybe what they're doing at the moment isn't getting the behaviors that they need. And actually, if they are willing to try doing it differently, they'll get different behaviors and different results. But that doesn't happen straight away.
Awesome. I've enjoyed that answer. Thank you.
any kind of questions off that or anything?
Can I just ask, so how do you demonstrate that that the current behavior is not providing the right performance? Is it through a survey or just business results are not what they expect? Or
yeah, it can be a bit of both. So I've seen there's actually a lot of research now available on this, so you can bring that in. So there's a lot of reports from everyone from McKinsey's through to others of perceptions often around performance processes. So, you can look at cases like Adobe's a famous one where they demonstrated that people found the performance management system cumbersome and a waste of time. So that was a mixture of engaged, surveys with employees and then also looking at some data. So they said, so therefore people don't see it as helping them do the job. So let's see if we can do this differently. So but I've also worked with a company where they brought in a lot of external research and also said that how do we, if we've got this one way of measuring performance and then doing rewards, and we want diversity in our organization, how does the two match up? So they started to challenge some of the assumptions that sat underneath the existing performance approach, basically, and said, if we're wanting to get this in our business, or we want to innovate more, or we want collaboration, how does this structure support that? So you can get the executives to start essentially questioning some of their assumptions around it.
Yeah, because individual objectives don't really help with collaboration. It's more competition, right?
Exactly, yeah, and particularly when they're linked to numbers, because there's this kind of
forced ranking.
Yeah, exactly, and particularly if it's forced ranking, exactly. So, that's one of the first shifts is at least going from individual to team based. How do we talk more about this being teams working together and what we're trying to achieve rather than individuals? Because in the end, and I think I think they're called Gartner now, aren't they? They used to be the CEB or whatever. They did a lot of research to show that performance is networked now. So one individual, always their performance is based on how they connect with other people to get the job done, not just what they do. So you've got to support an environment where you help people get the job done by connecting with other people and recognize that. And so removing some of the levers that are individual based only helps with that.
Thanks a lot. That's very helpful.
Pleasure.
Yes, thanks, Natalia.
Thanks, Daniel. Cool. All right, should we wrap it up? I can talk about these topics forever, so let's wrap it up. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Adam, and good luck with your. If you want to ask more questions, just drop us a line. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.